guys. So good to have you back for another episode of Evolve. I am your host, Monette Brann-Natta. And before we begin the show today, I want to acknowledge something that happened last night. For about 1 hour, many people sat rapt and attentive as we watched history unfold. I won't lie to you and say that I didn't sob the whole way through, because I did. I watched President Obama, who had my heart years before he had that prestigious title of president. I watched him in a bittersweet moment call us to action. I saw the man who I first got to know in Dreams of My Father, his memoir, prior to his meteoric rise, in which he was very lyrical and unsentimental and compelling in that memoir. And last night, he slipped that same cloak on and rallied a nation that has been struggling to adjust to change. And I do not mean in a political sense. I mean in a human sense. We humans are sometimes slow to change. We don't like change even when we know that it's coming. And so, like the great father he is, he wrapped us in an orated embrace. He reminded us why we are great. He reminded us of our responsibilities as citizens to our democratic process. And he assured us that he would never be too far off, watching from a distance as we took steps into a new direction, like any good father would. As a Black woman, the significance of his presidency will never be dulled or sullied by pundits who verbally spar or friends on Facebook with different opinions. Because as a minority woman and a first-generation American, Barack Obama is the physical embodiment of so many of the lessons that my mother taught me. Work hard. And please know, because you're Black, you'll be held to a higher standard. Monette, you can accomplish anything you set your mind to. Carry yourself with class and dignity at all times. In the face of obstacle or obstruction, you hold your head high and you keep working. Yes, you can, you will, and you must, my mother would say to me. Yes, mother, I can. Yes, Obama, yes, we can. I am so grateful to have lived in a time when this was possible, and I was able to witness it. Obama also spoke about having a platform right where you are, which is something I'm really attached to and very fond of. Making a difference right where you are. My guest today has certainly heeded this call to action. He examined his life and decided to make a decision to change. And that choice he made is one that, though he didn't know it at the time, that simple moment when he said yes to himself, it would have ripple effects on the people he loved, co-workers, and even perfect strangers. His choice to feel the fear and do something anyway has been a catalyst in his life for amazing change. But he is so much more than that one moment and this one decision. He is a deep thinker. And as a bold Taurus son, Alan is a lover of music, art, and aesthetic. He has always been ahead of the curve, really, guys, in his life, from managing restaurants at 16 years old, when the rest of us were still figuring out our algebra homework, to being the first person in our small town to get his hands on an iconic work of pop culture art that was very taboo at the time. In his current incarnation, Alan is a loving partner. He is an entrepreneur, a health coach, though he would never refer to himself as that, folks, and I'll have to put that disclaimer out there. He would hate that. And he still finds time to nurture his love of aesthetics through his passion of photography, which, if I know Alan, he will soon transform into a thriving business. My conversations with this man have always been important. His ideas are grand. His reasoning is sound, and his advice will permeate your spirits today. And I know that because he has been the person with whom I have had the pleasure of bouncing my ideas and philosophies off of over the years. He has helped to sharpen my critical thinking skills, and quite frankly, he has helped me to evolve. And he does it with humor and insight that has always been beyond his years. I am so excited to introduce to you my friend first and my guest next, Alan. So good to have you today, Alan.
My pleasure, Monette. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have this conversation. It's a conversation that definitely we've been thinking about and talking about. And it's an important conversation because this is the struggle of my life. And so I'm not going to keep our guests in suspense too much longer. I want to say this. I think that this journey that you've been on has been one that so many Americans can relate to. It's something that, as I just said, I've battled with and still do. And after years of yo-yo dieting and various tools, I want to know what brought you to this place where you decided to attempt the route that you went. And can you tell our guests and listeners what route you went? What did you do?
Well, it was actually a series of events that led me to getting bariatric surgery.
Okay.
It was a series of fortunate events that led me, including some unfortunate events that led me to getting bariatric surgery, to change the way I looked, change the way I felt, change the energy that I pushed out into the world. I was almost 70 pounds.
Okay.
I had been very large for many, many years. In fact, I hadn't even, you know how sometimes when people will talk about, I just want to get back to me, right? I never had a template. I never had a back to me. I'd always been large my entire life.
That's something I can completely relate to. I always hear people telling that story like, oh, I was the cheerleader and I was the athlete. I'm like, well, I was the band nerd who was still big. So I don't know what me is. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we were band nerds together. So
Word.
I feel you on that. I think, in all honesty, that it was a long time in the making because at first I was totally against any sort of bariatric surgery whatsoever. And just to clear stuff up, there's a few different types of surgeries, and the procedure that I received was the gastric sleeve, where they take out about 80 to 85% of your stomach.
Okay.
Your actual stomach, your physical stomach. They pull it out of your body, and they sew it up, and it's a restrictive surgery that pretty much it allows you, and this is in my opinion, 2.5, 3 years later, that it allows you to be able to hit the reset button on a life of bad food choices that I was making.
Right. And so that's interesting because a lot of people say that there is no ability to hit the reset button, that if you have adult thinking in food, that's it. There's even support groups for it. So how did you know that you wanted and could hit a reset button? Besides the mechanics of the surgery, I get that. But what made you think this might work for me?
Well, okay. It was kind of a process. So I'll start from the beginning and I'll work my way through it. Initially, I was completely against any sort of bariatric surgery at all. In 2007, a friend of mine went into the hospital and she got a gastric bypass.
Right.
And at the time, those were very popular.
Right.
So, and she had complications from that surgery, and she ended up sadly passing away.
Oh my.
So my initial, my first impressions of this were that it was dangerous and that I should avoid it at all costs. And also at the same time, when you're heavy, I don't think a lot of people realize this, that when you're heavy, you're almost, I always felt like I was on a diet all the time.
Yeah.
I felt like I was on some sort. I remember being in high school with you and talking to you about the cabbage soup diet, and I've done the Atkins diet, and I've done the South Beach diet, and I've done the paleo diet, and which I've had varying degrees of success with each one of them.
Right.
However, I was starting to become fatigued. I was in my early 30s, and I was starting to become fatigued about the direction. I had just felt like I was always in some state of restriction, which, ironically enough, the surgery itself is its own form of restriction. But we'll get to that in just a moment.
A total restriction.
But so my first impression of that was not a good one. It was very negative, and so I was completely against it. And anytime somebody would even bring it up, I was like, no, that's not for me. I'm not sure. That's not what I want. I can do this. I got this. And eventually it became clear to me that I had no control over it whatsoever. I had no control over, I had control over the food that I was eating, but I didn't have any control over the emotional or the the food addiction aspect of it.
Right.
Because a lot of people who are heavy, I mean, it's just it's simple fact that people are addicted to food in various ways.
In various ways, yes. There is an addled state that I was mentioning where there's a compulsiveness that happens. In fact, just this morning I was reading something on Instagram, and it's a girl that I follow who does keto, and she said, I got into bad thinking patterns and habits last night, and I sat down on the couch and I ate Starburst. It's the first time I've cheated, and she's lost a ton of weight and she's been doing great and people follow her, but she said it's the first time I've cheated and I just wanted to be honest. I'm fighting the cravings and et cetera, but I thought what was fascinating was the addictive state. Even though she'd conquered the keto and lost the weight, she still was struggling with that pack of Starburst. Like, I want to eat this to comfort myself for whatever reason, you know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, once you eat the fruit, Eve, you have a knowledge of, and this goes to any sort of addiction. So once you have a knowledge of it, you live with it. You live with it forever. Kind of like an alcoholic. Once you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic. You live with it for the rest of your life.
Right.
And it's something that you have to deal with. Now, a food addiction manifests itself in a couple different insidious ways, I think. Because it's one of the only addictions that you wear on your sleeve. Like, people can see it. People can see your addiction.
I've said this my whole life, and insidious is the perfect word, Alan. Perfect.
Yeah. So going back to how this began, and it's so funny how the universe works and how kind of it takes a little bit of time for God to kind of lift the veil off your eyes to show you a bigger picture. And I was at work in 2013. I was at work, and I had noticed a friend had come back, and I was in a training class with her. I work in a corporate environment, and I was in a training class with her, and she had been gone for a little while, and she came back, and she just looked amazing. And I didn't say anything at first, and eventually I did manage to talk to her, and I said, listen, I don't know what you're doing, but you look fantastic. You just have this glow about you, and you're just radiant. And she said, I don't tell a lot of people this, but I had bariatric surgery. And I was like, oh, really? She goes, have you ever heard of a gastric sleeve procedure? And she told me about it. And I said, no, I hadn't heard about it at all. It was still fairly new. And that was that. I didn't even think twice about getting it at that time. Cut to about 2 or 3 months after that, another coworker comes back to work. Now here's the thing. Like, when you're out, I work in an environment where there's a lot of people, so it's very easy to miss somebody. It's very easy for somebody to be gone for a little while and then come back and be like, oh, I haven't seen you in a little while, and then catch up with them. However, she came back and she looked fantastic. And once the same thing, I pulled her aside. I said, I just want you to know you look wonderful. You look absolutely wonderful, and you're glowing. You could tell that it was just a shift of energy from the inside out, right? So she said, once again, just like the first one, I don't tell a lot of people this, but I ended up having gastric sleeve surgery. And it turns out that the two girls, completely separate from one another, went to the same doctor. When it happened the third time, that's when I started to take, and this time it was a guy. He had gone out, and he came back. And it was the same thing. Oh, my God, Eddie, you look great. You look fantastic. What's going on? What's your secret? What are you doing? Because, you're always asking people what works for them.
I know.
Well, we should be finding what works for us. We're always asking people what works for them.
100%.
So, he said the same thing. Total coincidentally, it was the same doctor. Now, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and we have thousands of doctors, probably within a 10 to 15 mile radius. Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, there's doctors all over the place.
Right.
This was just the universe unfolding this to me. They said, I went to this doctor, and then I asked his name. I said, oh, that's the same doctor so-and-so went to, and so-and-so went to, and then all of a sudden it just clicked in my